Lately, I've been feeling a bit off. Work has been hectic, and most days, I'm so exhausted that all I can do is head straight home and collapse in front of the TV. My routine hasn't changed in months. Leave work, put on my headphones to zone out, hope nobody talks to me, and then drive home. It's not exciting, but it's manageable. Or at least it used to be. A few nights ago, I decided to change things up. Traffic was terrible, rain was pouring down in sheets, and I was tired of the same dull route home. I thought I'd try a shortcut, a quicker way through the maze of downtown streets. The area was a mess of half-finished construction and old crumbling buildings. But I figured I knew it well enough to navigate. That's when I remembered the mall. I used to go there as a kid. Back then, it was massive, packed with people, and full of life. There was a carousel in the food court, neon lights everywhere, and an old candy shop my mom would use to bribe me whenever I threw a tantrum. But over the years, the mall started to fade. Stores closed, the crowds vanished, and it eventually became a shadow of its former self. Last I'd heard, most of it was abandoned, except for a few struggling discount shops. I was already running late, and the idea of cutting through the mall popped into my head, like it was meant to happen. I thought, why not? Even if it's mostly deserted, it'd probably be faster than walking around the block in the rain. Plus, maybe I'd feel a little nostalgic while I was at it. The entrance I found was one of those side doors, used by janitors or delivery workers. It wasn't labeled. Just a plain metal door tucked away in an alley, but it opened easily. No chain, no rusted handle, just a gentle push, and I was inside. The hallway was dimly lit, with fluorescent lights overhead buzzing faintly and flickering every so often. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in a long time, and there was a faint, musty smell that hit me immediately. I brushed it off. It was an old building. What else would I expect? At first, it felt kind of cool, like I was stepping into a time capsule. The floors were old-school white tile with black accents, scratched and cracked in spots. The walls were lined with faded ads for stores that hadn't existed in years. There was a faint hum in the background, maybe from some old fans, but no voices or footsteps, just a silence. And that silence hit me. It wasn't the kind of quiet you'd expect in an abandoned building. This was something heavier, like the place itself was holding its breath. The faint buzzing of the lights above was the only sound, and even that seemed like it was struggling to break the stillness. Most of the stores looked just as I'd imagined, boarded up or empty, with dusty shelves and faded signs barely clinging to the walls. A few windows still had displays, but they felt like snapshots of another time. Mannequins in outdated outfits, old movie posters advertising forgotten blockbusters, and sale banners with overly cheerful slogans that didn't fit the atmosphere. I started to feel uneasy, but I kept telling myself it was just the vibe of an old abandoned mall. Places like this always feel eerie when they're left behind. It felt like a ghost of what it used to be, but I told myself that was normal. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the other side and breathe in fresh air again. That's when I noticed something strange. The layout didn't feel right. I hadn't been there in years, so I figured maybe my memory was off, but the hallways seemed wrong. They were longer than I remembered, and the way they twisted and turned didn't make sense, like the angles were slightly off. I'd walk for what felt like minutes, only to turn a corner and end up back at the same stretch of empty storefronts. Then, I reached the food court, or what was left of it. It was completely empty, except for one table sitting in the center. There was a single chair pulled out slightly, like someone had just been sitting there and left in a hurry. On the table, there was a styrofoam cup, and I swear I saw steam rising from it. That's when I felt it, that first real wave of fear. You know that cold, sinking feeling you get when your body senses something's wrong before your brain can process it? That's what I felt. I stood there, staring at the cup, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just a trick of the heat from a vent. Maybe someone else was here, a maintenance worker or another person cutting through like me. I even called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" I should have turned back then. I should have taken my chances with the rain. But I convinced myself it was fine. It was just an empty building. People leave strange things behind all the time, right? So, I kept going. I turned the corner where the exit should have been, but it wasn't there. No double glass doors, no faded "thank you for shopping" sign. Just another hallway stretching deeper into the mall. That's when it hit me. I wasn't getting out anytime soon. I can't pinpoint the exact moment things went from strange to downright terrifying, but it happened fast. The hallways started feeling wrong. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they didn't seem like regular hallways anymore. They stretched far longer than they should have. And every time I thought I recognized a turn, it either led to a completely new area or looped back to where I'd started. I tried to stay calm. Old buildings can be confusing, right? But the more I walked, the more it felt like the entire place was shifting around me. Then I noticed the small details. The mannequins in the storefronts. They weren't in the same positions when I looked back. At first I thought I was imagining it, but I'm not that creative. One moment, they'd be posed normally, arms stretched out, wearing outdated clothes. The next, one would have its head tilted toward me, or its hand would be raised, almost like it was pointing. And the walls, something was off about them too. From a distance, the old advertisements on them looked normal, but up close, the faces on them were wrong. They were blurry, like someone had smeared out the features. Still, I could make out enough to know they were faces. The worst part? One of them looked like me, distorted, warped. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check the time or get a GPS signal. No luck. There was no signal, no Wi-Fi, just the spinning loading icon. The time was glitching too. One moment it read 4:47 p.m. The next, it jumped to 11:13. Then it reset entirely, flashing zeros like it had just been turned on. I tried retracing my steps, walking back the way I came, but nothing matched up anymore. The food court was gone. The hallway with the styrofoam cup now ended in a boarded-up storefront I didn't recognize. Still, I kept moving. What else could I do? The deeper I went, the stranger things became. Some hallways stretched so long that my phone's flashlight couldn't reach the end. The beam just vanished into the darkness, as if the mall itself was swallowing the light. That's when the whispers started. At first they were faint, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. But they were definitely there. I couldn't make out what they were saying. Just a low, steady hum, almost like the buzz of the fluorescent lights, but alive. Occasionally, I thought I caught a word or two. I even think I heard my name once, but I can't be sure. At least, I hope I imagined it. Then came the footsteps. I was sure I was alone in the mall. I knew I was alone. But suddenly I could hear them. Soft, rhythmic taps echoing behind me. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps, so I stopped walking. The sound didn't. I spun around, shining my flashlight down the hallway. Nothing, just empty space. The sound stopped too, like whoever, or whatever, was making it knew I was listening. I stood there for a moment, holding my breath. When nothing happened, I turned back around. The second I started walking again, the footsteps resumed. This time, they were faster, louder. It felt like something was getting closer. I didn't dare look back. Instead, I started running. I don't think I've ever felt as relieved as I did when I finally saw an exit sign. After what felt like hours of wandering through endless corridors, mannequins that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, and whispers I couldn't place, I thought I was trapped for good. But then there it was, the bright red glow of an exit sign above a heavy steel door at the end of a hallway. It looked like a lifeline in the darkness, a promise that I wasn't stuck here forever. I don't remember how quickly I moved. 1 second I was standing there, staring at it, and the next I was sprinting toward it, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. My heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't fear. It was relief. I was getting out. The door was heavy, but it opened easily. The moment it swung open, a rush of fresh air hit my face. It smelled like rain, clean and normal. I stepped outside and found myself on a street. I didn't recognize where I was, but it looked like any other part of the city. I saw cars, their headlights slicing through the dim twilight, and people walking along the sidewalks, some carrying umbrellas or shopping bags. It felt like real, tangible, normal life. I actually laughed. I know how strange that sounds, but I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud. A shaky, almost delirious laugh. All the fear, all the weirdness in that mall. It had gotten to me. And now, here I was, standing in the middle of a busy street like none of it had ever happened. I even muttered to myself, "You really need to get a grip." But then, I noticed something. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was too focused on calming down, trying to process everything. But as I watched the people on the street, I realized they weren't moving right. There was a stiffness to them, like their bodies were following a script, but didn't fully know how to act it out. A woman in a red coat walked past me, her arms swinging in a loop, the same motion over and over again. Across the street, a man adjusted his hat, then did it again and again, like he was stuck in some kind of glitch. And the cars, they were completely silent. No engines, no honking, just the faint hum of the city. It was like a white noise machine trying to mimic the sounds of a street, but getting it all wrong. My stomach sank. The relief I had felt only moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. Slowly, I turned around, hoping, praying, that I'd see something normal behind me. What I saw was worse. The mall was still there. It wasn't the same door I'd come out of, though. This one was taller, darker, with warped glass that seemed to shimmer under the light. It looked as though the building had followed me, refusing to let me go. The shaky laughter I'd felt earlier? Gone. All I could think was, I didn't escape. I never left. I don't know why I went back inside. Maybe it was panic. Maybe desperation. Or maybe it was because the mall wouldn't let me leave, no matter what I did. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I knew I'd made a mistake. The air was colder. sharper. My breath fogged up, and the faint smell of mildew hit me like a punch. The layout had changed again. The hallways were narrower now, the walls closer together. I swear I could feel them pressing in like they were alive and watching me. Every step I took made the floor creak under my weight, as if the building was groaning, unhappy that I was back. The mannequins were worse this time. They were everywhere, lining the windows, slumped in the corners. Their heads were gone, just smooth necks bent at odd angles, like they were still staring even though they didn't have eyes. Some of them had their hands raised, frozen in strange, almost pleading gestures. I tried not to look at them, but I couldn't help it. Every time I glanced away, I could swear they had moved closer. The whispers were no longer soft. What had once been faint murmurs had deepened into something cruel, low, almost like growling. But it was still quiet enough to make me question if I was really hearing it. It sounded like a crowd, all speaking at once in a language I couldn't understand. The echoes bounced off the walls, filling the air with an oppressive noise that made it impossible to think clearly. Then I noticed the signs. The storefronts, which had been empty before, now had glowing signs. But they weren't advertising anything normal. Some just displayed my name in bold, flickering letters. Others had phrases that made my stomach churn. Things like, "We've been waiting for you." One sign simply said, "Don't run." I didn't know what to do. My legs kept moving on autopilot, even though my brain was screaming at me to get out. But there was no way out. I turned a corner and froze. It was the food court again, or at least I think it was. The same peeling tiles, the same dim lighting. But now, the table with the styrofoam cup wasn't off to the side. It was in the dead center of the room, like it had been waiting for me. The steam was still rising from the liquid inside, curling up in thin wisps, but now, the chair was pulled out, facing me. Sitting in the chair was a mannequin. It wasn't like the others. Its plastic skin was cracked, and its hand, smooth, artificial, and horribly human, was wrapped around the cup. Its head was tilted, almost like it was looking right at me, even though it didn't have a face. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it, but eventually, my legs gave out. I slid to the floor, my back pressed against the cold tiles. My back pressed against the wall as my chest heaved with shallow breaths. That's when I felt it. The wall behind me wasn't solid. It was soft, warm, and it was moving, pulsing, like I was leaning against something alive. I shot up so fast I nearly lost my balance. My hands flew to the wall, touching it, as if I needed proof that it wasn't what I thought it was. But it was. It was pulsing beneath my fingers, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I panicked. I completely lost it. I don't even remember deciding to run, but suddenly my legs were moving, carrying me blindly through the endless corridors. I wasn't trying to think anymore. I couldn't. The walls pulsed, the whispers chased me, and the lights flickered in stuttering bursts, buzzing like they were about to fail completely. The shadows on the walls didn't stay still anymore. They twisted and stretched, forming shapes that didn't make sense. I screamed for help. I don't know who I thought would hear me, but I screamed until my throat burned. The sound barely seemed to carry. It just fell flat, like the air swallowed it whole. I turned corners without thinking, sprinting past storefronts that all looked the same. The lights above me flickered so violently, I could barely see. But ahead, there was something different. a glowing green exit sign above a heavy steel door. It was different from the others. No warped glass. No sense of wrongness about it. It looked real. It felt real. But so had the last exit. I hesitated, torn between staying where I was and taking my chances with the door. That's when I heard it behind me. The shuffle of footsteps, low murmurs, just on the edge of hearing. Something was coming, and it was getting closer. I didn't think. I just ran for the door and threw it open. For a moment, I thought I'd made it. I felt the rush of air, the promise of open space. But then I looked around. I was back in the food court. At first, it seemed empty, just like before. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized I wasn't alone. The tables were full, dozens of people, or what looked like people, sitting perfectly still, facing each other. No one spoke, no one moved, and none of them had faces. Their heads were smooth, blank, featureless ovals of flesh-colored nothingness. They sat stiffly, their hands resting neatly on the tables. My eyes darted to the center of the room, and there it was again, the table with the styrofoam cup. The steam still curled lazily into the air. The mannequin was gone. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The figures didn't react at first, but then, one by one, they began to turn. Slowly, methodically, they all turned to face me in unison. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking so badly I almost fell. My back hit the wall, and I realized there was nowhere to go. They just kept staring, whatever the faceless equivalent of staring was. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, but eventually, I heard it again. The whispers. This time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from the figures, dozens of them, all speaking at once, their voices overlapping in distorted murmurs, like they were trying to form words but couldn't. And then one of them stood up. I couldn't move. The figures rose from their seats one by one. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, like someone was pulling them up with invisible strings. They didn't speak, just that horrible, overlapping whisper coming from all of them. It filled the air, pressing down on me until I thought my chest might cave in. They surrounded me, slowly forming a tight circle. Their faceless heads tilted, as if studying me. My heart pounded so loudly, I could hear it in my ears, but my legs wouldn't respond. I was trapped. One of them stepped closer. Its movements were jerky, deliberate. It reached out, and I wanted to scream, to shove it away, to do anything, but I couldn't. Its hand was cold when it touched my face, like metal left out in the winter. The moment its fingers brushed my skin, a jolt shot through me. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I wasn't standing anymore. I was sitting at a table. The table, the one in the center of the food court. The styrofoam cup of steaming liquid was in front of me, just like it had been before. I thought maybe I had imagined everything. Perhaps I had passed out. Or maybe it was all just some kind of nightmare brought on by stress or dehydration. I looked down, ready to grab the cup and shake myself back into reality. But the hands resting on the table weren't mine. They were smooth and plastic, joined at the knuckles like a mannequin's. I tried to move them, and they obeyed. But it didn't feel right. It was like there was a disconnect between the command and the action. My breath caught in my throat, and I glanced around the food court. The figures were back at the tables, sitting still and silent, just like before. None of them moved, but I could feel their attention on me. My mind raced, trying to understand, to process what had happened. But all I could feel was the crushing weight of realization. I was one of them now. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at my hands and the cup in front of me. Time doesn't seem to work the same way here. I don't even know if I'm alive in the way I was before. But I can still think, I can still feel, and I can still remember who I was.